My name's Noah, I'm 25, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the unnoticed child in my household. Not the defiant one, more like the shadowed presence. I was never the young one who ignited chaos, but I also wasn't the one my parents flaunted at gatherings. That honor belonged to my older sibling, Mason. He's the radiant star, captivating, athletic, the kind who could forget someone's milestone and still leave them delighted by the talk's end. Me, I was the reserved one, buried in manuscripts, chasing triumphs that didn't gleam on digital feeds. Graduation day was meant to shine differently. I'd labored for years to reach this point. Endless twilight hours, juggling side gigs, pulling overtime to bridge tuition gaps when scholarships didn't extend far enough. I'd imagined that moment for years. The stage glow, my name declared, my kin in the audience cheering loud enough to rise above the clapping. I even secured them the top seats in the auditorium. But that morning I woke to a note in the family chat from my mother. "We can't make it today. A situation arose. We'll mark it later." I sat gazing at my device for a full minute, thinking it was a bitter prank. I scrolled up to check if they'd clarified, but the next message came from Mason. "We're heading to Telluride for the week. Completely impromptu. Can't wait." Mom chimed in a moment later with a cascade of snow emojis. No apology. No recognition that my graduation, my university graduation, the first in our line, was happening in under 4 hours. I didn't respond. I couldn't, my throat constricted, and the walls of my apartment suddenly felt confining. Part of me wished it was a mistake. Perhaps they thought my event was later that week. But no, they knew the date. I'd been discussing it for months. I'd sent them the official notice from the university and even a reminder last week. They simply chose otherwise. Chose him. When I reached campus, I tried to suppress it and focus on the moment. Friends and classmates were there with their relatives, capturing images, holding flowers, laughing in huddles on the grass. I smiled when people congratulated me, but the unease in my chest kept swelling. Every time I glanced toward the section where my family should have been, all I saw were outsiders. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I'd remember the pride, not the vacant chairs. Then my name was called. I walked across the stage, shook hands, smiled for the picture. And that's when I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. It was my father. A message, "Come back home immediately." No explanation, just that. When I stepped off the stage, I saw the notifications stacking up. Missed calls, 37 of them. The same message repeatedly, "Come back home now." I didn't answer. Instead, I stared at the screen, my diploma in one hand, my phone in the other, wondering what could be so pressing that the family who skipped my graduation for a ski getaway now suddenly demanded I abandon everything and rush back. And as I stood there in the midst of the crowd, the sound of celebration all around me, I felt something shift inside. A cold, quiet understanding that whatever awaited me at home wasn't just about a situation arising. This was the beginning of something greater. I didn't know it yet, but that day was going to carve a permanent divide in my family's history. The before and the after. And I was about to learn just how deep the split would grow. When I finally returned to my apartment that evening, still in my graduation gown because I hadn't bothered to change, I found 3 more missed calls from my dad and 1 from my mom. No voicemail, no actual explanation. Just more of the same 2 words, "Come back home." I sat down at my modest kitchen table, the one I'd purchased used when I moved out, and just stared at my phone. I hadn't heard from any of them during the ceremony itself. No congratulations, no photo request, not even a text acknowledging it happened. Now they were treating me like I was late for an emergency I knew nothing about. An hour later, Mom's message finally arrived. "Your sibling needs you." It's vital, no context. No inquiry about whether I was okay or how the ceremony went, just straight to Mason. I could almost hear the tone behind it, the same one I'd grown up with. In our house, Mason's problems were family problems. Mine were mine. If Mason scraped his knee, the world halted until he got a bandage and a snack. If I sprained my wrist during gym, I was told to walk it off because Mom was occupied. I had learned early that my role in the family wasn't to be supported, but to be helpful when someone else, usually Mason, required something. I didn't reply right away. I set my phone face down and went to the fridge for something to eat, only to realize I'd been too absorbed in finals to restock properly. I poured myself a bowl of cereal and sat there in silence, thinking about how every major milestone in my life had somehow been dimmed by Mason. My high school graduation, he'd been caught throwing a massive party the night before, so all anyone could talk about was the trouble he'd stirred. When I landed my first job, he totaled his car the same day, So the family chat lit up with everyone discussing insurance claims instead of celebrating me. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed again, a video call from my dad. Against my better judgment, I answered. Dad's face filled the screen, his expression stern and impatient. Noah, finally, we've been calling you all day. I was busy, I said flatly. Graduating, he didn't even acknowledge it. Mason is in a jam, he needs you to come over tonight. Now I blinked. What kind of jam? Dad sighed like I was being unreasonable. His credit cards are maxed out and he can't clear the balance. He was counting on you to aid. I stared at him. He was counting on me? I didn't even know about this until 10 seconds ago. You're adept with finances, Dad said, as if that explained everything. You've been working through school, saving up. Mason wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical. I felt my jaw clench. You skipped my graduation to go skiing, and now you're asking me to bail him out. It wasn't about skiing, Dad said quickly, but I could see the ski lodge behind him in the video, the timbered walls, the lavish chandelier. Mason had been tense and we thought the trip would help. You know he's been under strain lately, right? I said, my voice cool, and I guess I haven't been. Dad's expression shifted, that subtle flicker of annoyance I'd seen my whole life. The unspoken message, stop making this about you. When I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the blank wall opposite my couch. It wasn't just that they'd missed my graduation. It was the expectation that I would, without hesitation, set aside my own life to tidy up after Mason. It had always been that way. When he flunked a class in college, I was pulled into doing his work just for one semester. When he racked up a tab at a lounge, I was coerced into paying it off because family stands together. But somehow, family never stood with me. 2 days later, I got another call, this time from Mason himself. He didn't bother with hello. Hey, so when are you bringing the cash over? I'm not, I said. There was a pause, then a chuckle. Come on, don't be like that. You've always helped me before. Yeah, I said slowly. And you've never once shown up for me. Not for my graduation, not for anything. Why should I help you now? He snorted. Wow, so you're gonna hold a grudge over some ceremony? You're being trivial. That word, trivial, struck harder than it should have. It was the same thing they'd always said whenever I stood up for myself. In their eyes, my boundaries weren't boundaries. They were overreactions. By the end of the week, I was getting texts from every family member I could think of. Aunts, uncles, even my grandmother. All telling me some version of Mason is your sibling, you can't just let him falter like this. Or don't discard family over funds. Not one of them mentioned my graduation. Not one. The thing was, I hadn't even declined because of the money. I had declined because I was weary. Weary of being the cushion for a man who never learned to stand alone. Weary of being invisible until they needed me. And the more they pressed, the more I realized they didn't see me as part of the family in the same way they saw Mason. I was a resource, a tool. What I didn't know then was that their pressure campaign was just beginning. The texts, the calls, the subtle jabs, they were all building towards something much larger, something they thought they could trap me into. And they had no idea that the more they pushed, the more I was already starting to devise how I'd push back. It wouldn't be long before they handed me the perfect excuse. And once they did, there would be no returning. It was a quiet Thursday morning when the real strike hit. I had just finished sending out a few job applications, the kind of roles I'd been dreaming about throughout college, when I got a call from my bank. The woman on the other end was courteous but concerned. Mr. Rivers, I just wanted to confirm a large transfer request we received from your account earlier today. I sat up straighter. Transfer request. I haven't authorized anything. Cancel it, I said immediately. That's what I thought, she replied. It was initiated online from an IP address registered at your parents' home. I didn't need a sleuth to figure it out. My parents had my old banking login from years ago, back when I was still in high school, and they insisted on monitoring things so I wouldn't overspend. I'd never changed the password because I trusted they'd never use it without my consent. I guess that trust was misplaced. I ended the call trembling, not just from rage, but from the quiet, deep realization that they'd crossed a line I couldn't overlook. This wasn't requesting help. This wasn't even guilt-tripping. This was theft, plain and simple, and it wasn't even just about the funds. It was about the fact that they felt entitled to take from me without asking. Because in their eyes, it wasn't really mine to begin with. Before I could even process what to do next, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Mason. Thanks for covering it, buddy. I'll repay you when I can. A winking emoji followed like it was some harmless joke between siblings. I didn't reply. My hands were too gripped around the phone, knuckles pale. I thought back to every moment they'd made me feel insignificant. Every time my achievements were pushed aside. Every time I was told to be the mature one while Mason escaped with anything. Now it was clear. They didn't just expect me to pick up the pieces when he stumbled. They believed I owed it to him. I called my mom. She answered brightly like nothing was amiss. "Noah, we were just mentioning you. You should visit this weekend. Did you authorize a transfer from my account?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. There was a pause, not the pause of someone puzzled, but the pause of someone crafting an excuse. "Oh, darling, we knew you'd assist your brother. He's in a tough spot. And we didn't want to disturb you with the details while you were busy with school matters. You took from me," I said. Her tone hardened instantly. "Don't be theatrical. We're family. It's not taking when it's for someone you care for." Something inside me shifted at those words. For years, I'd let that warped version of care dictate how I was treated. But in that moment, it struck me. Their definition of care was just a term they used to justify taking whatever they wanted from me. I hung up before she could say more. The silence in my apartment was so piercing it felt like it had edges. My diploma was still leaning against the wall where I'd left it after graduation, unframed, unopened. I stared at it, and I realized it wasn't just a document. It was evidence. Evidence that I'd built something for myself despite them, despite being constantly ignored, despite being treated like a standby for their favored son. That night, I updated every password I had. Bank accounts, email, everything. And as I did, I thought about the 37 missed calls on graduation day. The way they'd turned my milestone into Mason's ski trip. The bold assumption that my hard-earned savings were theirs for the taking. They had fired the first shot. They had made it clear they weren't going to respect any limit I set. And I had a feeling they thought I'd just simmer quietly and then forgive them like always. They were wrong. Because this time they hadn't just wounded me. They'd given me a cause, a perfect cause, to finally stop playing the part they'd assigned me. And in the days ahead, that cause was going to be the spark for something they wouldn't anticipate. What I didn't know yet was how far they were willing to push me before I acted. But I was about to find out. The next couple of weeks felt like moving through dense mist. I still went through the routines, sending out job applications, attending a few interviews. But my mind was elsewhere. Every time I opened my banking app, I half expected to see something else gone. I kept my phone on mute because I couldn't bear the constant pinging from family members, each with their own gentle nudges about how I should let it go for the sake of family harmony. The story they were spinning was predictable. Mason was stressed. Mason was struggling. Mason didn't intend any harm. Somehow I was the distant one for making an issue of it. The theft had been reframed as a mix-up, and my refusal to yield was holding a grudge. It was surreal. I wanted to yell every time someone told me I was being unjust, but I didn't. I didn't give them the satisfaction of hearing my irritation. Instead, I withdrew. I stopped attending Sunday meals. I stopped answering calls unless they came from numbers I didn't know, in case it was a job prospect. I stopped checking the family group chat entirely. When I finally opened it one night out of grim curiosity, I saw a series of photos from the ski trip, Mason posing with his friends, champagne in hand. There were giggling emojis and captions about living life fully. My graduation? Not a single image, not a single mention. That hit harder than I wanted to admit. I tried for years to convince myself that if I just worked hard enough, if I achieved enough, they'd see me differently. That they'd be proud in the same way they were proud of Mason. But the truth was right there before me. I could discover a cure and they'd still find a way to make it about him. My finances were tight now. Graduation had already drained most of my reserves. Application fees, rent, basic living costs. And while the bank had canceled the transfer before it went through, there had still been processing fees and a hold on my account for days. I had to scrape by with what remained. I skipped meals more than I cared to admit. My apartment felt colder, emptier. It was the first time in years I felt truly isolated. Not just without company, but without the illusion of support. The worst part? My degree should have been opening doors, but without any real connections or family backing, I was just another profile in a stack. Every rejection email was another reminder that I was on my own now. That if I fell, there was no one who'd catch me. Unless catching me meant taking something from me. But here's the thing. In that quiet, in that solitude, a part of me began to awaken. I started keeping a small notebook by my bed, jotting down everything that had happened since graduation. Every call, every text, every piece of manipulation. I started looking back, writing down old incidents too, moments I'd dismissed at the time. When I read it all together, it was like observing a long, slow-moving disaster. Patterns I'd ignored before were glaringly obvious now. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do with it, but I knew I was done reacting on impulse. I wouldn't shout, I wouldn't plead, I wouldn't try to make them see my side. That had never worked and it never would. Instead, I was going to wait. Watch. Let them keep revealing who they were, and when the time came, I'd have more than just the will to stand up for myself. I'd have a strategy. The problem was they weren't done with me yet. And before I could put that strategy into motion, they were going to push me further than I'd ever thought possible. Far enough that I'd have no choice but to act. The change started small, almost unnoticeable at first. I landed a part-time research assistant role at a local company. It didn't pay much, but it gave me enough breathing room to cover rent without dipping into the last of my savings. More importantly, it was a step inside, a place where my abilities actually mattered and my efforts weren't constantly overshadowed by someone else's charisma. The first time my supervisor, Laura, praised my report-writing skills in front of the whole team, I didn't even know how to react. I wasn't used to public recognition that wasn't immediately undercut by a "but Mason" remark. Here, no one compared me to a golden child. No one minimized what I'd done. I showed up, worked hard, and people noticed. It was strange and invigorating in its own subtle way. Within 2 months, that part-time role became full-time. I was suddenly earning enough to not only keep my bills paid, but to start rebuilding my savings. I upgraded my wardrobe with a few professional outfits. I started eating better, getting back into shape, and even joined a colleague for early morning jogs in the park. For the first time in a long while, I woke up each day feeling like my life was actually progressing, without my family's approval, without their involvement at all. The social shift came next. One of my coworkers, James, invited me to a networking event for young professionals. I almost didn't go. The idea of networking made me think of forced smiles and shallow chats, but I went anyway. And to my surprise, I met people who were genuinely interested in what I did and what I was working toward. Over the following weeks, I built connections, swapped contact info, and even started attending industry gatherings. It was an instant success, but it was steady, undeniable progress. And the best part? My family had no clue. I didn't post about it. I didn't send updates. I learned to cherish the quiet. Every accomplishment felt like a card I was keeping face down on the table, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. Financially, I started to pull ahead. By month 4, I'd cleared the small debt I'd carried from my last semester of school. By month 6, I had a growing emergency fund. Around that same time, Laura recommended me for a side consulting gig with a startup. It was only a few hours a week, but the pay was more than generous, and it let me stretch skills I hadn't touched since my senior thesis. That gig snowballed into another one, and before long, I was making more on the side than I had at my original full-time job. I knew the version of me they were used to, the quiet supporter, the one who said yes because it was easier than fighting, would have never reached this point. This was new ground. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building leverage, and still I kept my cards close. When my mom called to ask if I was doing okay financially, I gave her the most vague answer possible. I'm fine. No details, no openings for them to gauge how much they could take. The less they knew, the less they could target. But Mason couldn't help himself. He started sending me casual messages again. "Hey mate, how's work? Got any plans for the weekend?" I recognized it for what it was, testing the waters. He'd done it before after our disputes, slowly slipping back into my life until he could ask for something. This time, I didn't bite. I gave short, polite responses, nothing more. And yet I could feel something brewing, call it instinct. Call it the years of watching how my family operated. The tone of their rare messages had shifted. Polite, even warm, in a way that felt scripted. I didn't know exactly what they wanted yet, but I could guess. Money, favors, something that benefited Mason at my expense. What they didn't realize was that they weren't dealing with the same person anymore. I wasn't the broke, dependent college student they could corner with guilt trips. I had resources. I had connections. And for the first time in my life, I had the means to say no and make it stick. Still, I didn't move first. I knew that if I waited, they'd hand me the perfect opening. They always did. And when that moment came, I wouldn't just say no. I'd make it clear, in a way they couldn't ignore, that the old version of me was gone for good. The moment I was waiting for was closer than I thought. And when it arrived, it would be bigger and uglier than anything I'd imagined. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening, 6 months after my graduation. I was just leaving the office when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Mr. Carter. a senior partner at a mid-sized investment firm. "Noah, I've heard good things about you," he said, his tone all business. "Laura speaks highly of your work, and James mentioned you're excellent with financial structuring. We could use someone like you for a project we're taking on." I'd learned to keep my excitement under wraps, so I listened carefully. The project turned out to be a full-scale portfolio overhaul for a local chain of boutique inns. It wasn't just a task. It was a chance to work directly with high-net-worth clients, to get my name in rooms I'd never even known existed a year ago. The fee they offered for my role was more than my monthly salary at my regular job. I said yes. Over the next several weeks, I threw myself into the work. It was demanding, late nights, endless spreadsheets, constant strategy calls, but I was in my element. My input started to shape decisions. The chain's owner, a sharp but friendly man named Michael Reeves, took notice. "You're not just good with numbers," he told me one night over dinner with the project team. "You understand how people think. That's rare." I didn't know it then, but Michael would end up being one of the most valuable connections I'd ever make. He had deep ties to the local business community and was well respected in circles my family couldn't even dream of entering. While all this was happening, I was also gathering information. Not because I was actively planning revenge yet, but because old habits die hard. I'd been keeping that notebook of mine updated. Every petty comment from my family, every manipulation attempt, every subtle probe into my finances. But now I had something more. Through casual conversations with family friends at networking events, it's amazing what people will share over a glass of wine. I learned that Mason had been trying and failing to get backing for a business venture. Apparently, he'd pitched a half-baked idea for a luxury sports lounge to several investors, but no one was willing to touch it. One comment stuck with me. "If he can't get someone to co-sign a loan soon, he's done for. Your parents are really worried about it." I tucked that away in the back of my mind. I knew my family well enough to see the pattern forming. At some point, they'd try to present this sports lounge as a family opportunity, spinning it as a chance for me to support my brother's future. They'd push hard, frame it as an investment, maybe even try to guilt me by saying it would unite the family. And they'd assume I didn't know how bad Mason's situation really was. Meanwhile, my own position kept improving. When the inn project wrapped, Michael pulled me aside. "You ever thought about starting your own consulting business? You've got the skills and I've got contacts who'd hire you tomorrow." The idea ignited something in me. Within a month, I'd filed the paperwork for my own small firm. It was still just me and a laptop in my apartment, but I had my first 2 clients before I even finished setting up the website. By the end of that quarter, I'd made more than I'd earned in an entire year at my first job. I didn't boast, I didn't even hint at it to my family. I let them think I was still working a modest office job, scraping by. Every time Mom asked, "How's work?" I'd give a vague, busy but good and change the subject. The less they knew, the better. But privately, I was building something that gave me real power. Not just money, but options. Options to say no without fear. Options to walk away without losing anything. Options to strike back if they crossed me again. And sure enough, that moment arrived one Sunday afternoon when I got a family dinner invite out of the blue. No reason given, just "we'd love to see you." My gut told me this wasn't about catching up. This was the setup. I already suspected what was coming. What I didn't know yet was just how far they were willing to go to try and rope me in, or how perfectly their plan was going to set the stage for mine. I walked into my parents' house on that Sunday evening with the kind of calm you only get when you already know the ending to the story. The aroma of Mom's roasted lamb drifted from the kitchen, but the atmosphere in the living room was stiff, too rehearsed. Dad was sitting in his armchair, hands clasped like he was hosting a board meeting. Mason was on the couch, leaning back casually, but his eyes were just a little too bright. After the usual hollow greetings, Mom poured me a glass of water and said, "We're so glad you could make it. There's something exciting we want to discuss. A family prospect." I almost smiled. There it was. Mason launched into his pitch, complete with printed pamphlets and a laptop presentation. He talked about the sports lounge of the future, about upscale decor and signature drinks, about exclusive ties with local breweries. He used phrases like entry-level opportunity and assured returns. I listened, nodded occasionally, and didn't interrupt. When he finally finished, Mom leaned in with that expectant smile. "We've already got interest from a few investors, but we'd love to keep it in the family. We thought you could step in as a primary backer. It'd be such a great way to bond." "Really?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. And how much are we talking about? Mason didn't flinch. $150,000 to start, but you'd own 30%. Huge potential, mate. I set my glass down and leaned forward slightly. That's a big ask. So just out of curiosity, have you told all your potential investors about the loan rejections? The room went still. Mason's smile faltered. What? I mean, the ones from First State Bank, Harborview Capital, and Westline Financial. The three that turned you down because your projections didn't add up. I kept my voice steady, but I wouldn't want anyone to feel like they weren't getting the full picture. Mason's jaw tightened. I don't know where you're getting your. I cut him off with a shrug. People talk, especially in business circles, and I happen to move in a few now. Dad tried to salvage the moment. Noah, this is your brother's dream. You're in a good place now. You could really help. That was my cue. I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it onto the coffee table. Inside was a polished, bound copy of my firm's portfolio, clients, contracts, revenue forecasts. All legitimate. All impressive. You're right, I said. I'm in a good place. Good enough to know this isn't an investment, it's a rescue. Mason's face went red. Mom's mouth opened, then closed again. And here's the thing, I continued, my tone still calm. I don't invest in people who take from me. And before you say it wasn't taking, let me remind you. I spoke to the bank. I know exactly who tried to pull money from my account after graduation. That landed like a rock in a pond. No one moved. I stood, tucking the folder back into my bag. From now on, I'm done being your safety net. I'm not your investor, your cash source, or your fallback plan. Whatever pit you've dug, you can climb out of it yourselves. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back just long enough to twist the knife. Oh, and Michael Reeves? He's a friend now. His company owns 3 of the city's busiest lounges. When your pitch crosses his desk, and it will, you can guess how that'll go. Mason didn't say a word. Mom looked like she wanted to, but Dad's hand on her arm kept her silent. I left without another word. The sound of the rain outside somehow lighter than when I'd arrived. They'd come expecting the same old Noah, the one they could pressure into giving in. Instead, they'd gotten the version they'd spent years shaping without realizing it. The one who'd learned exactly how to outplay them at their own game. What I didn't see, not until later, was just how severely that single evening would unravel things for them. The aftermath began faster than I'd expected. 2 weeks after that dinner, I got a text from an old neighbor. Hey, just saw your brother at the bank, looked furious. Something happened. That same day, I received an email from Michael Reeves confirming my suspicion. Mason had indeed sent him the sports lounge proposal. Michael hadn't just declined. He'd forwarded it to a few other prominent investors in the city with a short, professional note. Not financially sound. Proceed with caution. Within days, Mason's entry-level opportunity was dead in the water. Word travels quickly in tight business networks, and his name became synonymous with overpromising and underdelivering. Every lead dried up. No bank would take his calls. No investor wanted a meeting. That alone would have been enough, but my parents' reaction sealed it. Mom called me late one night, her voice tight. Do you know what you've done? Your brother's future is ruined. We had to take out a line of credit on the house to cover his debts. I kept my voice even. I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped shielding him from the consequences of his own choices. There was silence on the line. I could almost hear her swallowing back whatever she wanted to say.